Right.
further distance. If you stay in one space, it'll be easier, but then you don't have to be attached.
Howdy, folks. Thanks for being here today. We really appreciate it on a cold, blustery day. A little bit of sunshine. It's nice. My name is Jason Isaacson, and I'm your state senator. And I'm really excited to have a chance to talk with you folks. If you don't know much about me, I'm a college professor. I have 3 kids that are at home right now terrorizing my house that are 5 and under. And my wife is out of town, so she somehow got the get better end of this deal, I think. She's up with family up in Moose Lake. But I'm really excited to have a chance to talk with you guys. I want to hear as much as we can about all the issues you're concerned with. We have a lot going on in the legislature, and so I'm looking forward to your questions. I'm going to pass it off to Representative Jamie Becker Finn.
Good morning. So Representative Jamie Becker Finn. So this is the 42B town hall. I know it was a little confusing having, So I live in the Roseville end of the district. I am also a parent. I've got a 4-year-old and 8-year-old at home that are not entirely thrilled that I had to work on a Saturday, but they understand and we'll go sledding later. So just really excited, glad that folks made it in. I know the roads weren't ideal this morning, but it's really good to see so many people here this morning. So we are excited to be here and excited you all could make it. I did want to point out, so when you came in, you likely smiled at or said hello to one of our legislative assistants. So, so my legislative assistant, Katie.
Hey, Katie.
And then Senator Isaacson's legislative assistant, Cynthia.
Right there.
So if you come into our offices in St. Paul or you call to make an appointment, these are the staff that are helping make sure that our calendars are managed and that we're talking to as many of you as we can. So really thankful that they were both able to come out on a Saturday as well. They work really hard, especially during sessions. So just want to thank them for coming out, and I think we'll get started.
Yeah. So usually we say a few words, and I can just tell you that you've probably followed a lot with what's going on in session, and I could bore you to tears with the millions of bills I'm offering and that Jamie's offering, but really, I think you guys all probably hear him with questions. So what we're going to do is just start off with that. Evan over here is the bouncer and enforcer, and so his job is to keep everything civil and
Scary
sane.
guy.
And so, Evan, why don't you come into the, you're wanted in the back. Uh-oh.
Oh, we found
Uh-oh,
us another mic.
found another mic. It's high tech here in Shoreview. I'm excited. Anyways, Evan will be asking questions, letting you ask questions, and what I'd like you to do is just, is that a mic? Okay. So let's just be clear about what you want in terms of questions, and if you want both of us to answer or just one of us, and if there's any concerns you might have, we'll be ready to go. So. A question? Yeah, I will.
Good morning. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. I have a question. It's not on.
Oh no, it's on. It's recording. We're not. It's not. That's for the. We're trying to record the town hall, and that's why we're doing the weird mic stuff. Unlike, so it's not. We have to be loud still.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm wondering if there's any legislation put forth on distracted driving. When I was in California, I happened to get one of their wonderful $405 tickets for holding my cell phone at a stop sign. And I'm just very curious what we are doing. I've seen so many distracted drivers, it's upsetting. So are we doing something? And what?
So it's since the mics are working and not working so much. So the question was about distracted driving. On the House side, we have started, moving ahead on the hands-free cell phone. You'd still be able, if you have Bluetooth in your car, you'd still be able to use that. But it's currently illegal to text and drive in Minnesota, but it's really hard to enforce because you can pull somebody over, and even if they have their phone out, they can say, "Oh, I wasn't texting, I was just changing the song," and then technically they haven't violated the current law. I think I'm gonna switch it.
Yeah, do it. I'll switch this.
Yeah. So current law is that it's illegal to text and drive, and so we're taking it the next step. So it has to be hands-free. So then, if you're observed with your phone out while you're driving, if you're parked, obviously that's fine, but if you're stopped at a stop sign, you're still driving and hopefully are paying attention. So we're hoping we can move that forward this year.
I would just say that we're doing the same thing in the Senate, and we're waiting for it to go through. I think if there's any place that's going to block it, it's going to be the GOP majority in the Senate, which is not approved of this in the past, although I think that they're getting closer. So we're hopefully going to see this go through. Questions?
Check 1, 2.
I guess. Hold on, we got a follow-up right here.
Why are the GOP? Why are the GOP?
The question was, why is the GOP objecting to this bill? What we're finding is there are several bills like this that they're using as bargaining chips. And so there isn't a lot for them to bargain with at this point, and so they're kind of holding up. You saw the same thing happen with the HAVA funding. We're having that same battle. That's Help America Vote Act. We're having the same problem with that. There's just some issues that for whatever reason they don't want to bargain on. And there are a few powerful chairs over there, Senator Limmer, for example, that really struggles with what he perceives to be infringements on personal freedom. And he's very, very adamant about that. And so that's been something he's also been problematic on. So
Technical difficulties.
we'll just keep going. Let's be loud, right back there.
Could you comment on what you anticipate getting through in terms of educational funding, both the general fund and special education cross-subsidy?
Okay. That's a big question. So the question was, what do we think we're going to get through with educational funding? And I assume you mean E12 educational funding, and specifically the cross-subsidy?
Both the general fund and
So the governor has asked for 3 and 2 on the formula, which means a 3% increase in the first year and a 2% increase in the second year on the general formula, which is meant to be somewhat akin to following inflation. And then the cross-subsidy, the governor put in an amount that we would say probably maintains the status quo, doesn't fall backwards and doesn't move forwards either. And so for the most part, the governor's budget on education is considered to be fairly robust. If you stay out of higher education, I would say that it seemed to be fairly robust. And I think the House will probably be pretty good, if not better, than the governor's request on that. What I don't think will happen is whether or not Senator Carla Nelson in the Senate will go along with that. She's the GOP chair. When we opened up session this last time, they got rid of the Education Policy Committee. So there's 4 Democrats that right now are currently on any education committee anywhere in the related to E12 in the Senate. And so both are now going through their district or that committee. And it's hard to know what they're going to bargain on. They've been pretty good about keeping their hands close to their chest, so to speak, and they're not really giving us a lot of insight on that right now. I do know that in the past, if there's one area that they've tended to work with us a little bit more than most, it's education. So I anticipate it's probably going to be one of the better areas that we get through. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I know that we're pushing for a significant increase in cross-subsidy funding because that's where there's a real shortfall, and then also trying to find a way. I had a novel idea I presented the other day when I said that perhaps we should go to the special ed teachers and ask them what they need. I mean, crazy concept, but I thought, why not ask the people doing the job if they think there's ways we can make it better? And so I'm hoping that they'll follow through with that.
What do you mean by cross-subsidy?
I was terrified you were going to ask me that. It has to do with the way in which we reimburse for special education. So it has to do with how money comes in, because it isn't just straight from the state that way. There's a bunch of other aspects to it, so it's unnecessarily complicated, and I might have exhausted my knowledge on it just now. But let's...
Is that a follow-up?
I was just going to explain what special ed.
Oh, please do, yeah.
We have 2 Roseville school board members here this morning, so.
Cross-education, the cross-subsidy occurs because when the federal law was passed, there was an agreement that the federal government would fund 40% of it. Most have ever funded 18%. The state was supposed to fund a significant portion too, and that hasn't kept up over time. So for example, in the Roseville School District, just in the last 5 years, our cross-subsidy has increased by $5 million more. And so our cross-subsidy is about $10 million now. It's a significant amount of funds, and then takes away from everything else. And we would like to try to see funding that's commensurate with the mandates that we are obligated to fulfill.
We're over here. We got some. Do you have a question? Well,
We've got a working mic now, so.
in theory, yes. Right.
I watched Almanac recently, and there was a criticism that this, in terms of this legislative session, that it's moving bills especially slowly, that it was supposed to be better than average in terms of the promises were that they were going to move bills quickly, and it's not happening. So I'd like you to respond to that.
If you've been watching what's going on, at least on the House side, we're actually at a pace that we have legislators who've been serving for 20 years, and they've never seen us move this quickly on bills. And I can attest to my exhaustion this session as compared to previous sessions. So, I mean, we already had 11:52 p.m. Session on Thursday night. So bills are moving quickly, and at least on the House side, this Speaker Hortman is committed to non-controversial things, and especially things that were in that Omnibus Prime bill that everyone was kind of in agreement with. We're trying to actually move those things along quicker so that we can vote on them and pass them off the floor. So it's really, I know it's really complicated. There's all these different deadlines that mean different things, but I'm actually really confident with the schedule we have for deadlines. That was an agreement between the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader. So, you know, members of both parties, and they're in agreement. The idea being that we don't save everything till the last 3 days of session. So thus far, we're moving right along. And, you know, obviously it's there's all kinds of roadblocks that can come up, and you can't always predict everything that happens in the legislature. But I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll actually pass quite a few things this year.
Not so much in the Senate, sadly. That's the problem, is that I look at my schedule next week, and it's the first week that I see a full slate of bill hearings. So March, we're finally going to have where I have an actual full committee that'll probably go the entire time. It is not in the advantage, at least in their mindset, of the Senate majority to go fast on these things, because the more things that pass, the less thing they have to negotiate with. And so we've probably, what's funny is we're at a record pace for creating bills, but we're at a not record pace for actually passing the bills. So they've dropped the plow on that, and so we're not seeing, literally, like I said, I've been watching Jamie go crazy. I get texts from her about where she's at and what committee she's in at all hours of the day, it seems like. And she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm driving home. It's 5. We're done. I have nothing to do. I'm in the minority, so I'm just going to go and see my kids, which is pretty cool.
He was in charge of making sure we had coffee this
I
morning.
did. It was a big.
He did.
And by that I mean my LA is amazing. So
Yeah.
let's be clear. But I'm sad to say that that's not the case, and we try to push them on that, like the HAVA funding and other things. But it's been, you know, we just don't have the votes to force anything to happen we want to happen. So I think you had one over here. Okay, good. Oh, please. We,
You gotta be on the mic with the camera.
So what can constituents do to nudge the reluctant senators to do some work in terms of phone calls, letters, emails, and other things that might get some of the people moving?
my professional answer would be that people should contact their senators and let them know they want to see this working. My political answer would be is if you find that your senator is obstructing your ability to get things done, maybe we need different senators, right? And I have been pushing, what's funny about it is the Senate Republicans have been really savvy about picking winners and losers, right? And so they have chosen certain ones of us that they're giving all their bills to be the co-signers, so they're bipartisan. And then other bills, they've put the word out, like Senator Little, that if he's on a bill, that bill will never pass. And so for whatever reason, I'm on the good side of this, so I'm on more bills now than I ever have been when I was in the majority.
Until they watch this town hall.
Which might have been a strategic point on my part to do that. No, I had to be more considerate about that because I realized I was getting bills 3 or 4 a day to sign. I've never had this many bills in my purview before. And so they're trying to appear bipartisan on one side, which this is a strategy they use, and I'm not sure that when we're in charge, we do anything that different from there. So I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just trying to walk you through what they're doing. So really, the only thing I can encourage is people to reach out to their senators and talk to them. So give me a call, and I'll go yell at them some more. Right behind you.
Back to special ed for a minute. I like your idea of asking teachers what they need. My son-in-law is a special ed teacher, junior high, emotionally and behaviorally disturbed children. And he feels that the biggest impediment for him in the classroom is untreated mental illness among the students and oftentimes among their parents. And he also has some opinions about the education system as a whole and how it seems to crush black culture.
Yes.
And he's not in favor of that. So he needs a new job, but maybe that's interesting information for you to have.
So I'll take you back to the first part of your question about mental health resources. So we know that our student to counselor ratio in our schools is terrible. I think it's 700 to 1, the last figures that they're giving us. And I certainly know in my kids' elementary school, there's no counselor on site every day, for an entire school. There's their school nurse and the principal and the teachers. And, so I think we all recognize that, but one of the hardest things is that the folks who are the least able to advocate for themselves are often the folks who need the most help and need the most, maybe funding. And it is hard because if you're a child who's struggling, you're not going to know how to use the legislative system to your advantage. And if you're a parent of a child who's struggling, you're busy trying to parent. And so I think, that one of the good things about this, we have a couple moms who are also doctors, and we now have a couple trained therapists who are now serving in the House. And I think this also is connected just to across the board. We don't have mental health parity. It's technically the law says we're supposed to have parity, but we really don't. A lot of this is it's funding, but it's also policy, and it's one of those issues that's really hard. And so I think for some legislators, it's easier to not dive into that, but I know Senator Isaacson and I both really care about that issue, so I'm certainly bringing it up whenever I can. And I think it also speaks to something that the Lieutenant Governor talks about a lot. Our kids don't exist in silos. They're full human beings who have needs inside and outside of our schools. And on the handout of mine I have up there, one of the bills that I have that sort of talks about that is the No Child Left Inside bill, recognizing that when kids spend more time outdoors and are more connected to nature, they actually do better in school. They're psychologically better, they're physically better. So I think we're just gonna have to chip away at it. But at the same time, if we're struggling just to get the 2% on the per pupil formula, it's where is the additional funding going to come to pay for those counselors? So it's a complicated issue, but I'm glad that you brought it up.
Right behind, there you go. Nope. And then you're
Hi.
next.
Would you talk a little bit about Minnesota Care and what is happening with it, please?
Sure, that'd be great. I'm getting the fun ones. Okay. So I sit on the Health and Human Service Reform Committee, which is one of the two finance committees that actually try to pass both policy and money in the Senate. And what we're seeing right now is an interesting push with all of the different healthcare options. They're trying to every possible. They're here. It's one committee where we're hearing bills all the time, right? And I think that what you're going to see as a strategy with that is that's going to be one of those last second deals, right? I don't think anybody who tells you they know what they're doing on that right now, I don't think has a clear beat on that, because the problem is that the governor has one way of approaching it. Our Senate lead, John Marty, has a much different way of approaching it. And then you have Michelle Benson, who doesn't seem to understand it the way I wish she should. maybe the best way to say that. And so that's really frustrating. And so those three things colliding, and then you have Representative Tina Liebling in the House, who has a pretty robust push on that as well. So there's really not like a definitive spot at this point about where we're going to be with any of that stuff, because everybody's opinion is still out there, and we just finally got the budget forecast and the governor's budget. So now you're going to see, and the reason why, it's no coincidence on the Senate side that all of a sudden now the bills are coming, because now everybody knows where their turf is, and now they're going to all try to protect it, right? And so in healthcare, you're going to see probably a lot of different pushes. What I do feel good about is I think that Tony Laurie is at the helm at the DHS or HHS, and he is phenomenal. He's probably the smartest mind in healthcare in the state. And so I know he's going to be giving the governor good advice on that. And what I would encourage you to do, because I feel like I can't give you as much of an answer as you want, is reaching out to me. Let me know, and I can literally put updates on that issue alone every week if that's something you guys would be helpful. I'd be happy to say this is where we're at today, knowing it's kind of a moving target, and maybe we could coordinate that so we can give you kind of a House and Senate perspective, and I can badger the governor as well. I wish I had a better answer, but frankly, if I gave you anything more than that, I would just be making things up. Which is a shocking development that a politician's not doing that. I get that, but still. Who's ever next? And then there's one in the corner back there too.
Gas tax and infrastructure. What's the scoop? What's happening?
So, okay, so we're seeing, right? Oh no, you win. The governor has asked for a 20-cent gas tax, and he is clawing some taxes back from the transportation fund. So even though it's a 20-cent gas tax, it's actually only a 12-cent increase, because he uses 8 cents of that 20 cents to buy back what he's clawing out of transportation and putting back into the general fund. I will tell you that it appears that the Republicans find that to be a non-starter. And so I don't know that we're going to see a gas tax, and if we do, I would bet it'd be a nickel. That'd be my guess on the Senate side. But on the House side, I'm not sure if you want to tackle that one.
Yeah, so I think, so I'm on the tax committee. We haven't had the discussion yet on the gas tax. The tax committee is one of those committees where all the other committees are pretty much done, and we're still going to be meeting 3 days a week. So yay, I'm on the tax committee. But I expect we'll at least have a full discussion. Chair Marquardt is the tax chair in the House, and he's all about having full discussion in public about the pros and cons of different things. So, you know, we've heard proposals already, probably 50-50 from Republicans and Democrats, so that we can kind of have those policy pros and cons discussions. So I think we'll at least have the conversation, I think, on the House side. As far as infrastructure, there's appetite from a lot of us. We have the ability in bonding to do additional bonding. We have the room to do that in a fiscally responsible way. Historically, bonding has been something that's done every other year. But I believe that if we have the space to do it and there are good projects that are ready to go, we should really start looking at doing bonding on an annual basis instead of every other year, just because we don't want to work hard enough to have those discussions every single year. So, and you know, we've got projects that would affect our area that are being proposed. So I think infrastructure-wise, there's a better chance, I think, that we have some kind of smaller bonding bill than there is that we pass a significant gas tax this year. And that's my 2 cents on that issue. Again, a lot can change, and but yeah, the GOP doesn't seem to have an appetite for the gas tax.
Can I just add one more thing to that? You know, Governor Walz ran on a couple of things very clearly, and one of the things he ran on was raising the gas tax. There was no question, there was no ever, I mean, his opponents made sure everybody knew that. He made sure that everybody knew that. And so when he comes forward with the gas tax, I think he feels like he's got a bit of a mandate when he wins by such a wide margin. And so I imagine he's going to try to carry that in terms of putting some pressure. He won 9 Republican Senate districts by 5 points or more. And so there's a lot of senators that are feeling some heat on that. And I think if there is going to be a discussion, and Jamie, correct me if you think I'm wrong about this, but what you're going to see is that What's probably going to happen is at the end there's going to be a deal made, and a bunch of stuff's going to go through. And what's going to happen is the majority leader is going to allow it to come to the floor, and then he's going to let off enough members so it passes, and let the Democrats pass it in the Senate, and then they'll pass through the House. And that's probably how we'll see something like that happen. So your Paul Anderson, for example, where Walz won by like 20 points, and even Clinton won by 15. He's a Republican senator. He's probably going to have to break off, and there's a few other senators that I think are going to feel the heat and need to do that. If there's any way that passes, that's going to be the mechanism, is that the majority leader lets it come to the floor, they beat up on it for an hour, we support it, and then it passes. I think we had one back there, too.
Yeah, he's been waiting a while.
I had a follow-up question to that gas tax about the increase in the license tab fees for vehicles, brand-new vehicles. Doesn't that seem a little disproportionate, or let's say, doesn't it push people to not buy new vehicles? I just look at the European model, at least they tax older cars more than newer cars because they're less fuel efficient and they're more abusive to the roads.
Yeah, and so to be clear, the part of the governor's plan, and to be clear too, the governor's proposed budget is not necessarily the House DFL proposed budget or our individually proposed budget. So they changed the way that they do. And I mean, your point is well taken. I would imagine the thinking is that if you're able to afford a brand new car, you could probably afford more. For that, but I hear you, because and that's a provision that I don't know that exact piece would move forward, because I mean, I think you have a good point there, and honestly, a lot of what we're dealing with kind of at every level goes back to shifts and kind of gimmicks that happened in the last 20 years, and we're trying to, it's really hard once you become dependent on taxing different things and having fee structures in a different way, that maybe wasn't so fair, but it was part of a way to make it look like we weren't spending so much out of the budget in that given biennium, whether it was 4 years ago or honestly 14 years ago. So, for instance, I have a bill that would change the way we allocate Ramsey County fine revenue. And what that actually, and a valid question that was asked in the committee was, well, why does the general fund get any of our city's fine revenue? Well, it went back to, over 20 years ago, and a deal that was made to take money from there at a time where we didn't have a surplus. And so, but then we didn't correct the very next year. And so I think that the high fees on things like vehicles, you can all kind of trace back to that way of funding things.
Can I just jump in on that?
Yeah.
I have to tell you that I share Jamie's disdain for that. And one of the really frustrating things I learned when I first came in was just a number of things like this, that when you pull them out, create holes in the budget, right? And then because the Tim Plenty and the Democratic Senate Majority Leader together did some pretty not very good things for our economy, like getting rid of inflation as a part of how we look at our budget. There's a lot of those little gimmicks, things they did to get out of session, and neither of them. So I want to put it just on Tim because that's my partisan bent, but the reality is the Democratic Senate, who was in charge that entire time, was complicit and agreed to all of it. So it's really a partisan problem on both sides. And that's really frustrating when we see there's I could literally go on all day about these examples of different places we've created these little pots of money that go into the general fund that shouldn't. And so I personally will not, if I can avoid voting for it, will not support license tab fees going up unless we can find a way to guarantee that stays, I guess, right into infrastructure. And I don't know that that's the case. Right. So that'd be my stance on it. I'd encourage you to follow up. My guess is it'll be in a bill with 5,000 other things. And then I've got to make some choices, to be frank, right? So that's what's frustrating.
Richard Podman. I was at a meeting of the Transportation Committee of the House last Thursday. It was a very impressive committee meeting.
I was just coughing. Yeah. I was just coughing, sorry.
Oh. And there were dozens of testimonies from immigrants who would like to see driver's licenses for all. And there were 2 commissioners testifying in support. Also, the manager of the Chamber of Commerce was there. A lot of support. 2 things stuck out for me, and then I want to ask my question. One was that an imam stood up and read from the Quran in Arabic and said, God, Allah, stands for the dignity of every person. The dignity of every person demands that they have the right to drive in this state. Please. And so then the second thing was Ryan Winkler, who is the majority leader in the House, made a very strong point that he would like to see a bipartisan effort for driver's licenses for all. And he is very eloquent and open to that. However, I think that there's a significant drag on approval of that legislation to give driver's licenses for all in the Senate particularly. So how do you, Jamie, or you, Jason, what role can you take to explain that there are a number of very common sense safety on the roads issues, aside from the dignity of the person that should have a license? How do you convince people to come across aisles and make this a non-partisan issue?
So it was a multi-layered question. So first, I'm a co-author of that bill. I think it's good policy, and kind of overall to your question, one thing that I always remind people is they're kind of like, well, that bill didn't become law this year, so you didn't win. And part of the legislative process and it being a public process is that no matter what, having that conversation in the public and having it, in the media and having people weigh in and having people hear those discussions of why it's important has value, whether that becomes law this year or not. So I think and I will say too, our biggest leaders on the House side on this bill are so the majority leader Ryan Winkler, but then also freshman legislator Representative Aisha Gomez. She represents one of the most diverse districts in the entire state, and she's spoken really eloquently to this issue as well. And then the third person is actually Republican Representative Rod Hamilton, who represents the Worthington area, where there's a lot of that area the economy of that area absolutely depends on the immigrant communities who live there. And so, I think the more we have these conversations and the more, that was a phenomenally, there was a really great hearing with a lot of people at the table. And I think you also see the coming together of really various faith communities, workers groups, workers' rights groups, as well as our immigrant groups and different organizations who advocate that, we take care of everybody who lives here. So I think just having that hearing, that bill will come to the House floor and we will have a full discussion out in the public of why it's so important. And I think that that's partially how we get people to think differently about this issue. I will say for me, one of the things to keep in mind with that issue, if folks aren't familiar with it, is that our law enforcement community wants us to pass this. So it isn't a purely, progressive, conservative, whatever. It's really a coalition of folks who recognize that this is an important public safety issue that would affect our entire communities.
And one thing I want to add to that real quick is just what we're seeing on people that are resisting this. They're conflating the license with the immigration issue that's going on at the federal level with Donald Trump on the wall, and those two things just aren't related. But as long as that conflation exists and people are willing to believe that, That's where a lot of the people pushing back on it are coming from, right? And the two just aren't related. When you look at what the facts are of what giving a person a license does in terms of creating safety, buying insurance, mobility, going to their job, paying taxes, that's just too important, right? And so that's just not related to what is being conflated as the problem. So.
Thank you. This is just related question, that's why. I'm so happy that I moved to Shoreview. So I have two favorite senator and representative here. Well, I just wanted to extend that immigration issue. And there is a severe issue of workforce shortage in this Minnesota now it's becoming. And then if you really look at the portion of how diversity population will rise, that's another issue. So we're not like a needy, helpless immigrant, and then North Minneapolis people are not helpless people. We are asset to this country. So when you look at the education, you know, we have a great University of Minnesota. I'm so happy that I serve as a Board of Regents for University of Minnesota as the first Asian in 1995, but they treated me like a token, you know, no more tokenism. And we really have to look at this issue of how are we going to live together. You know, I mean, I thought I was just going to retire. I wasn't going to get involved politically, but really pushed me to do this because I really think our country is going wrong way. So please, Senator and Representative, you know, both of you, that please push this issue for every level of the issue that you have to put that in your mind. Thank you.
You know, when it comes to the workforce shortage, it's quite astounding. I met with a lot of folks in the last week because we've been talking about this. I'm on the Jobs Committee, and the reality we have is a shortage on just a stunning number of technical areas. And across the state, it isn't just in one spot or one demographic or one job area, but manufacturing and technical work got hit the hardest. As we all know, you've heard me say this a million times, we got rid of tech ed in the high schools and the junior high schools, and we're absolutely paying the price for it right now. Imagine what our economy could be doing if those 50 to 100,000 jobs were being filled right now, jobs that pay pretty fantastically. Right? And the problem is we put ourselves in a bad spot, and now we're trying to dig our way out. I've offered bill after bill every session to try to move us closer to that direction, and we're starting to finally get it. It goes back to kind of what Jamie was saying, that the conversations, I call it setting the table. Sometimes I know a bill isn't going to go through, so what I do is I set the table the first year, so the next year when it comes back, people are more versed on it, and now they're ready to go. When it comes to immigration, I want to be clear. I have a sizable Hmong community in my district. We have a sizable Somali community, and I know there's been negative press about some of the folks in those communities. But the reality is if you want to look at one of the single biggest entrepreneurial engines running our economy right now, it's those two communities. They do more in creating wealth and trying to create jobs and building jobs and taking responsibility. I'll never forget what a Somali immigrant who's now living in the United States said to me. The most amazing thing to me about you guys is if you want to make more money, you can just go get a second job, and it's there. I just work more. So now I work 2 jobs. And if I want more money, I'm going to go get a 3rd job. And I'll just keep working until I either run out of time or I get the money that I need. But this idea of that work ethic and that strength is so important and vibrant to our community that we have to be thinking about that as a part of the calculus when we look at how are we going to put as many people as we can into these good jobs. And we're just not doing it yet. And I want to see us use our university system, especially Min-State and the community colleges, which can become regional hubs of enterprise and really helping small businesses. Listen, the Senate a couple years ago passed this great bill, a jobs bill that was meant to help and put people to work, but it really affected the top 5% of companies. And the bill I offered at the same time helps the lower 50% of companies that are 50 people and less. They make up the backbone of our economy. Those are the people that are actually creating wealth and putting their credit and their life on the line. Those are the people we should be giving support and helping them get to work. And I just don't think we're doing that the way we could. And we're definitely not engaging in some of the best workers I know in diverse communities to help make that happen.
So I'll actually two things to that. So one, many of you likely know at this point that that I'm a Native person. I'm an Ojibwe descendant. So unless you're of Native descent, our community is made up of immigrants overwhelmingly. And so I always feel like it's important to point that out because it's really gets turned into this us versus them thing. And it doesn't have to be that way. There at some point, each one of the communities that people come from, and the rest of my background is Norwegian, so it's, I think it's important to acknowledge that. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention, we have good organizations that make these connections already, like the International Institute of Minnesota. If folks are if you're not familiar with that organization, please Google them, look them up. So they do the work of helping new immigrants and refugees and connecting them to skills and job training, and they really have a pipeline to different types of jobs where we need the workers. And so we have good programs like that, but we could do more to help them expand and help other programs like that that really can be impactful, especially in our healthcare fields, especially. And then I know there's I think the international we have a board member from the International Institute here. They're looking at expanding more programs and really being intentional in picking out what fields those are where those make sense. I also know our building trades programs. They have they really want. They want to recruit more folks and really make sure that every person in the community, regardless of your background, has access to those training programs because they do need the workers. So I appreciate the question because obviously it's a huge topic of conversation right now, especially with our current president. But the reality is that we all do better when we all do better. So I think the more we can do to promote programs that do that, the better off we all are. You don't have to.
As to the workforce shortage, I would like to offer great support for that. My son is in a group home in White Bear, part of Northeast Residence, and in that organization, 25 group homes plus 3 or 4 additional programs, they are short 60 staff. It is a crisis right now. We, as parents, are helping out in more ways than you should be. Elaborate.
Yes.
Right now. So, and I also want to say to both of you, thank you for your support. I know you are bringing forth a bill for the ICF-MR.
I have a hearing on Monday. Yes. What up?
Yes.
So excited.
We need deadline.
Whoa.
Which I will be there for. I also applaud you, Senator, for your support at the HHS House and HHS
House reform or Senate reform.
Reform and Finance Committee of HHS. For your commentary there, I appreciated it very much. I'm part of MINFAC and on the board of Northeast. So.
Let me tell you, if I can just address that for a second. She is not kidding. We are in a crazy crisis period where we have simply not taken responsibility for those that are in need. And I'm not talking like, oh, we've cut some funds and that kind of stuff. This has been a 18-year systemic problem since I've been around watching this, back when I worked in the industry. What we've done is we've put these places that are across the state in literally crisis staffing mode. So they're just barely covering the law. And I don't know how what I said to them, and I'll say what I said in the committee, I said, at some point, we either have to accept that this is a priority and we're going to care for these people that have disabilities, or we have to stop lying to them and tell them we're not. But we can't continue to kick the can down the road, act like we care when our actions speak louder than our words, and our actions are pretty clear right now about what we think our responsibility is. And I know it's going to be difficult, but the reality is that, in my opinion, we're judged by how we help those who have the least to give us. And that group is a group of people that just need support to live a normal life, and they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness like everybody else, and we are absolutely failing that. 2 years ago when they brought Republicans brought the GOP budget in the House or in the Senate, they went through all the cuts that they were going to make to HHS. The commissioner got up and explained all the cuts and what this would actually do to all the services we provide. And I looked at the chairs and I said, I need to know one thing. Either you don't believe her and you think she's lying, or you don't care and I want to know which one it is, because your budget is irresponsible. And that's the reality we're in right now. Now, let me be clear. I get it. It's against the backdrop of a limited amount of money, but it's about how we prioritize that money and who is getting that money and how well we spend it. And are we spending it efficiently in the places we can? And are we prioritizing the things we should based on who needs it the most versus who has the most money to lobby for it? Because there isn't a big disability is not out there pounding my door every day, right? But I tell you, the banks see me quite a bit, right? And that kind of stuff. And so I encourage the self-advocacy. That's the only way this is going to change. I'm very fired up about this because it really frustrates me how obtuse the legislator seems to be about what this reality is. Yeah.
And I want to tie that kind of to a bigger issue when we talk about, because it is an expensive piece of the budget, and everything that Senator Isaacson just said is true. But what I want to point out is that taxes are also spending. So if a cut to some other group means there's less money for us to pay for programs like the respite program, like our group homes, all those things. So it's all interconnected. And I think sometimes, we talk about, so if you cut a whole bunch of taxes, well, now there's less ability to take care of people. And so, and that was one reason despite the fact that it's a lot more work, one of the reasons I really wanted to be on the House Tax Committee is that by law, tax bills have to originate in the House. And so there's a lot of important work that happens there. And so when I sit in that committee and we hear about different tax cuts for different industry or, different income levels, I'm also thinking about in the larger scheme is who benefits from each thing that we do. And the corollary to that is how much less money are we then going to have to take care of all these other things? So I just wanted to take that opportunity to put that out there as we think about where our values are and how our budget matches our values.
That was really good.
Speaking of money, does the MPCA have enough money? My concerns right now are about groundwater in the MPCA. I live not too far from the Water Gremlin plant, which is also not too far from a wood treatment plant. And
right.
So now I'm hearing that the MPCA didn't know about this or couldn't check on it for 15 years. And they all connect right to the aquifer. So just wondering if they're funded enough or if they don't have enough staff or why that's happening.
So and I serve on the Environment Committee. This is my second term serving on the Environment Finance Committee, and the MPCA is one of so Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Sorry, there's a lot of acronyms in our world. It falls within, the budgets that we oversee and the issues that we take care of. I would say that they aren't given the funding. I know the proposal last year from the GOP Environment Finance Chair was to significantly take away their funding. So the alternate push is, there are those of us who want to make sure that they have the tools and the staff that they need so that they can monitor things and make sure our communities are safe, that we do have clean water, clean air, clean soil, so we, all those things. But the other side of that is, we don't want to make it too burdensome on the businesses, and let's roll back some things and make it easier for them. Well, this situation with Water Gremlin in White Bear Township, which impacts several districts and parts of several cities, is a great example of what happens when you entirely rely on a business to self-report. And so that's why the MPCA didn't know, because the numbers they were getting from the company made it sound like everything was fine. And I'm not implying that that necessarily was intentional, but it's obviously very troubling and very, very problematic that we could be polluting the air that folks were breathing for 15 plus years and not even know it. And I think, especially when it's a chemical like TCE, I know the discussions I've had, since we learned of the water gremlin situation, have kind of been about, if a chemical is that dangerous, one, do we really even need to be using it? And then two, shouldn't the burdens of reporting and, the additional, maybe we should have higher requirements based on how dangerous the chemical is. Because I recognize that running a business takes a lot of effort and, I'm the child of a small business owner and, but at the same time, here's this corporation owned by a foreign company. It's a foreign company, and they were harming our residents for really almost 2 decades, and we didn't even know. Obviously, there's a problem there. So I expect that we'll be, as the situation with this particular incident, evolves. I imagine we'll continue to have discussions about how we can prevent that from happening in the future.
If I can just add on to that, what's a couple interesting factoids about that is, one, it has to do with the formula they had that was incorrect, that they tried to say MPCA gave them the wrong formula. Two, it has to do with that when the job for managing that got passed on, the bad information got passed on, so by the time it went to the next person in line, they had no idea they would do something wrong or wouldn't even know to look that they were doing something wrong. And so it created this kind of bad situation that apparently since 2002 had been dumping unnecessary, unhealthy amounts into the atmosphere. And I'm not an apologist. I think the settlement was too small. I'm unhappy with that, and I'm looking forward to watching us move forward to make sure we make that area whole again in whatever way we can. But I will just say this, that I think it's important to have all the facts. They didn't have to tell us. Not that that's not an excuse, but they were changing their system in March. And we would never have known had they not self-reported. And I think that's just an important thing to think about, that they did take responsibility independently without being pushed. Now, it's still inexcusable, and I think $4.5 million is the beginning part, another $3 million is as specific remedies, wasn't enough to fix what's going on there, and I think we're gonna have a lot of long-term problems as we see what effect that had. But I think it's important to understand that the system was designed because we don't give MPCA enough of ability to oversight some of these things, that we rely on that self-reporting. An error made, I'm not saying it was an honest error, I'm not saying it was or wasn't. But I am saying that in July, they began to recognize something was wrong, and by January, they owned it. And they got shut down. And they produce something like half of all the battery posts in America and 30% of all the battery posts worldwide. And so when they shut down, literally battery companies everywhere started to shut down because they couldn't produce, right? And it's 300 jobs. And so I want to just be thoughtful about that we have to kind of see it from both sides. That being said, if there is harm, I'm firmly in Jamie's camp on this. If there was harm, and you've been doing that for 17 years, I'm not sure that the current settlement is enough remedy. And I think it is, as she said very, very perfectly, it is the beginning to this process of how we make it whole.
Well, and to be, as the attorney here, the settlement does not preclude residents from civil action, either as individuals or in a class action situation. So I know some folks, they just read the headline and they thought that meant that they didn't have a right to do any additional follow-up, and this is just the beginning and has to do with the violations of their permit to the MPCA. Would I have liked to have been part of those conversations and that discussion before they signed the paper? Sure. But I do think that it is important for folks to realize that if there is harm done, there are still potentially remedies for folks in the way that our legal system works. Because I know I've heard from, so just to be clear, in our district, the only people in 42B that are potentially affected are people who've either lived or worked in the Gem Lake area, and then there's an area in White Bear Township and White Bear Lake. And TCE, because I also think it's important to be really clear about the facts of the chemical so that people aren't, one, they should be concerned, but I don't want people to be unnecessarily concerned if it doesn't, isn't likely to have impacted them directly. So it's a very volatile chemical that was put out into the air. It dissipates very quickly. So, in my mind, for example, the folks I'm most concerned about is if you were working at the Gem Lake Golf Course outdoors, breathing in that air for a prolonged amount of time. But if you just like visited Gem Lake occasionally, or were indoors, probably the effects are likely not as scary. And the other tricky thing with this too is that it's not a chemical like asbestos where it's going to be really clear, where we're ever going to be able to really directly, with the science we have right now, it's going to be really hard to directly link, oh, I got this kind of cancer. It's because, it's directly causally related to this. So I know there's a woman who's currently pregnant who lives in the affected area. And, as a mom, I certainly, that's my biggest concern, are folks like that. And I think there's also legitimate concern about property values in that area, because right now, if you Google Gem Lake, the first probably 10 stories that are going to pop up right now are involving this pollution. And so I think those are all legitimate concerns. I'm also working with the MPCA to bring both the Department of Health and the MPCA out to Gem Lake and hold essentially office hours so that residents have a meaningful chance to come in and talk face to face with state staff and ask questions and learn more, because I think it's important that people have accurate information about this situation. But it's certainly something we all care about a lot and are watching really closely and doing everything we can to advocate for residents.
The last thing I'll add is just that there's the part of the settlement has, like, they have to plant 1,500 trees. I'm not sure how that equates in there, but the other part of it is they're starting next week with immediate well testing, and they're going to be going throughout all of Gem Lake. Originally, they were going to do the affected area, but I've asked them to do all of Gem Lake. I know they've done the municipal wells as well, and so they're going to be starting that process immediately, getting on the ground and getting after that stuff. And we've been pushing them to be as fast as they can to bump whatever they have to bump to make sure this is taken care of, so we can understand what the full scope is.
Just kind of building off what we're talking about here with the different environmental issues and the issues when these companies aren't following the guidelines and the regulations that are in place. From my perspective, it often feels like these companies are kind of getting off with a little bit of a slap on the wrist. They spent the greater part of 2 decades violating these regulations, and I think when we look at how they need to, pay back the community or make amends for it, we should be looking at the kind of profits that they made by ignoring these regulations over these last 2
That
decades.
actually was how they calculated the $4 million, was based on their income, and they were turned their books overs to show what they had made in that period of time, and then there's a formula they used to get to that point. However, to Jamie's point and on yours, that's just what the state did. The county can still do something, each city can still do something, and every citizen can still do something. So I don't think we're done with that, and I agree that you're right. It should be based on the profits.
But I mean, looking forward at other, businesses. I mean, we have talks about a pipeline, being rebuilt through northern Minnesota. Talks of opening up mining area, logging area, different things happening throughout Minnesota. What kind of legislation? What can we do to put in place that will hold these companies more responsible when they do, violate these regulations